Good afternoon, and welcome to today's workshop, Addressing Challenging Behaviors. If you have questions during today's workshop, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A box, and we will hope to have time to discuss those after our initial presentation. And when we ask questions, you can share your ideas and thoughts as well. Tomorrow afternoon, you will receive a link asking you to complete a survey about the quality of the workshop. Please do take the time to give us your feedback. It really helps us make sure we're providing information that is helpful to you. That email will also include links to related information sheets. Once you complete the survey, you will get a link to the certificate of attendance. My name is Karen Malka. I am a parent advocate and the coordinator of the Children's Mental Health and EBD project here at PACER. I have a background in education, and I have two daughters of my own who have both mental health and learning disabilities.
Jamie, I think next slide. Thank you. My name is Jeannie, and I work alongside Karen in the Children's Mental Health Department of PACER. I too am the parent of two kids that were on IEPs, now young adults. And I am looking forward to being with you here today to discuss behaviors.
Next slide. We hope today's workshop will provide you with more information on understanding your child's mental health and behaviors and how we can improve our response to challenging behaviors using positive supports and interventions. Next slide. What is mental health? According to the World Health Organization, mental health is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community. They also recognize it as an integral component of health and well-being that underpins our individual and collective abilities to make decisions, build relationships, and shape the world we live in. That it is crucial to personal, community, and socioeconomic development, and most importantly, that mental health is a basic human right. Next slide. Let's start by talking about some common assumptions about behavior. We tell kids all the time to behave or be good. We have a lot of expectations for children when it comes to how they conduct themselves and respond to everything happening around them in their various environments. What do we mean when we talk about behavior? What assumptions do you have about why someone behaves the way they do? What are some assumptions others have shared with you about why your child behaves a certain way? How many of you have been on the receiving end of unsolicited advice and dirty looks when your child has struggled in public? I know I've been there many times. I'm sure every parent here has been in an uncomfortable position of having been told or implied that you're doing it wrong. Let's stop here and talk about other assumptions. We assume that everyone is doing the best they can with the tools and knowledge they have, parents and kids alike. Parenting is hard work. Being a child is hard work. It is a lifelong journey for us and for our children. And just when you hit a comfortable stride, your child reaches a new and different stage of development that likely brings new joys as well as new challenges that disrupt their ability to manage how they are responding. If we can shift the way we think about those preconceived or biased ideas about behavior and use a different lens, we can learn new, more effective strategies and skills that can help reduce challenging behaviors while supporting the learning and skill development of our children. Our children need to navigate their emotions, manage their behaviors, and attain a sense of competence and success at home, school, and in their community. First, we need to think of behavior as communication. Behavior has meaning. Like this iceberg illustrates, the behavior is what we see, but while the behavior is typically the part we respond to, isn't at the core of the problem. The behavior is usually the symptom of an unsolved problem or unmet need. We need to understand the underlying cause of the behavior in order to respond effectively. Behavior meets a need, and if that need is met with the problem behavior, it is likely to be reinforced and used again. We have all likely reinforced unwanted behaviors as we try to keep the peace and reduced any immediate safety concerns, and that's okay. The first rule to remember is that all rules and expectations need to be flexible and reasonable. While each difficult situation can feel like we've failed our kids in some way, these situations also provide us the opportunity to assess what happened and why. Did the way we reacted further escalate the situation? What was successful about this occurrence? What might we want to try differently next time? Remember when I said that this is a journey? It is a daily practice and one that takes time and patience. I make mistakes all the time. Just ask my kids. Still, like any other skill, we get better at it with practice. When we have a child who has big reactions to things around them, it can be easy to react rather than respond to the behavior. When we do that, though, we focus on the wrong thing. We reinforce the behaviors we are trying to stop, and in doing so, we often unintentionally escalate the situation. We don't have time today to dig into the mental health diagnoses and disabilities that can result in increased behavior challenges in children, but one we will mention is anxiety. Many of the calls we receive here at Pacer Center involve a child with anxiety. That may be their primary disability or may have developed as a secondary disability due to challenges they face in navigating the world. Dr. Laura Prager, Director of Child Psychiatry Emergency Services at Massachusetts General Hospital, explains that anxiety is one of those diagnoses that include behavior that is a great masquerader. It can look a lot like a lot of things, particularly with kids who may not have words to express their feelings, or because no one is listening to them, they might manifest their anxiety with behavioral dysregulation. On the surface, this may look like a child who is irritable, has trouble sleeping, has somatic complaints such as headaches or stomach aches, or who becomes verbally or physically aggressive in certain situations. It can manifest in a wide range of behavioral challenges. When confronted with a challenging behavior, we tend to conclude that the child either can't or won't do what they have been asked to do. If we assume won't is the strategy of choice, is often to punish or provide a consequence. But when we think can't, we are more likely to support them and develop strategies using skill building intervention. I can think back to meltdowns when my child insisted they couldn't do something, and I dug my heels in because I knew they were physically capable of putting on their shoes, or picking up their toys, or completing their math homework. This didn't solve the problem, meet the need, or de escalate my child. Instead, it usually made things worse. I wasn't able to listen. I didn't help them solve the problem. I didn't ask myself, why does my child feel they can't do this right now? The lens we are looking through helps us see if this behavior is the problem or the symptom. We continue to do what works for us despite the consequences, unless or until we learn better skills, children and parents alike. Next slide. To improve our responses to challenging behaviors, let's think about what is happening with the child. There are many parts of the brain involved in different tasks related to behavior. This is not intended to be a comprehensive lesson in brain development, but it provides a quick overview to help us understand why our child may struggle and how we can support positive growth. Significant growth and development occur in the brain during the first couple years of life. 90% of brain development is complete by age 5. However, the brain continues to develop well into the person's mid 20s, and it is not until then that the frontal lobe fully develops. The frontal lobe is where higher level cognitive skills, often referred to as executive functioning, occur. These skills allow you to control and coordinate cognitive abilities and behaviors. The three processes of executive functioning are cognitive flexibility, working memory, and inhibitory and impulse control. It's helpful to remember this when we wonder why our children continue to be impulsive and do not always think through their actions. Their frontal lobes are still growing and developing. These three executive function skills rely on other skills such as language development, visual, auditory, and sensory processing, visual, spatial, and motor skills, nonverbal communications, and general processing speed. With all of that in mind, it's easier to understand why a child who has a disability in one or more of these areas might struggle with behaviors. Children who struggle with executive function skills are more likely to report disliking school, which may put their academic success at risk. This is why focusing on building executive function skills is so important. At home, these activities might include playing cooperative games like Simon Says or Red Light, Green Light, activities that require planning and multiple steps to complete, following a recipe, meal planning, reading stories, working together to solve problems, and modeling how to cope with various stressful situations. It's also important to remember that the brain operates on a use it or lose it principle. Only those connections and pathways that are activated frequently are retained. For youth with memory or processing challenges, that might mean more repetition is needed to be able to use that skill reliably and independently. Next slide. So, what is happening when our child is using challenging behaviors to communicate that something in their world is not working for them? What happens when they become stressed or perceive there is a threat? You can see that the unstressed brain is able to control thoughts, emotions, and actions. But once stress occurs, the amygdala becomes activated and attention is diverted to become hyper focused on the stressor. Now, I use the word perceive here because the child's perception of what is happening may not match what we understand to be a threat. Children are still learning to distinguish between things they want and things they need. The inability to have a toy they want or continuing that preferred activity until it has satisfied their need, which may trigger stress and challenges as they try to solve this problem or meet this need. Likewise, when we use the threat of discipline or punishment to stop behavior in a child who is already agitated or stressed, it can serve as a trigger for a fight, flight, or freeze response, escalating the behaviors and impairing learning. By focusing attention on misbehavior, we may miss the opportunity to teach skills and can unintentionally reinforce cycles of behavior between ourselves and our child. Traditional discipline strategies typically include verbal reprimands, timeouts, or taking away privileges in school. This may be detention, suspensions, expulsions, or exclusions. These strategies are typically ineffective because they rely on external controls. We know from decades of research that punishment as a form of discipline may not have the desired effect of changing a child's behavior. It might stop the behavior in the short term because the child experiences the fear of punishment, but these methods do not address the underlying need. They do not help the child solve the problem or learn other strategies. Next.
So this is Jeannie. I'm going to take over from Karen from here on through the end until we get to Q&A. So I really appreciate this quote by Ross Greene because it creates a starting point or a frame of reference for how we view behaviors. Kids do well if they can. When they can't do well, it's because there's a reason. When we assume the reason is that a child is simply non-compliant, we miss the opportunity then to learn about what isn't working for them or what skills they may be lacking to meet expectations. Taking time to look below the surface of the behaviors, kind of thinking back to that iceberg picture that we saw earlier, allows us to use relational connection to gain insights about how to help in ways that will result in positive change. So if traditional strategies are unlikely to work, and those were some of the strategies that Karen just mentioned, we have to shift our perspectives and approaches. Regardless of your child's personality or individual needs, effective approaches to supporting behavioral change generally involve providing safe, relational connections and opportunities for collaborative skill building. Kids need consistent responses. They need to be able to predict what will happen. They need safe and dependable relationships with adults to successfully co-regulate and to build the skills they need to manage their emotions. We'll talk more about this later. Obviously, change is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It'll involve experimentation, successes, and failures. And as soon as you think you found an approach that works, seeing positive changes for a day or a week or a month, behavior patterns might change again. I'm sure most of you have seen that with your own children. This is normal. As your child develops and as they experience new circumstances, new behavioral responses can evolve, or old ones become re-triggered. When you see this reemergence of behaviors, view it as a red flag notifying you that your child likely needs help to strengthen existing coping skills or to learn new ones for new situations. When you try new strategies, it's easy to wonder if they're working when you don't see improvement. It may even appear that behaviors are increasing or intensifying as you make positive changes to your approach. Any change, even positive change, can produce a stress response simply because it's experienced by your child as different. It's unfamiliar territory for them. They don't know what to expect when new patterns haven't been established yet. Remind yourself that behavioral challenges may take months or even years of patient consistency, and that success will naturally ebb and flow. So that all sounds very logical, doesn't it? But we know it's easy to model positive, patient, and consistent responses when our children are doing well. When they're agitated or stressed or angry or out of control, our own triggers can sometimes be set off in the heat of the moment. Kids are highly intuitive. They detect even subtle underlying strain. Our language and voice tone give us away. In these moments, take a deep breath and acknowledge to yourself and your child that this process takes effort and practice for you too. You're learning and growing together. Pause and practice responding in a calm voice, using supportive statements that validate your child's feelings, even when you disagree with what they're feeling or saying. One of our PACER colleagues shares that when she feels herself escalating in response to her children, she chooses to channel her inner Yoda or another peaceful figure she imagines would exude the calm, supportive response her child needs in that moment. So you can think about who that figure might be for you, that role model. In our society, we place a lot of importance on independence and self-regulation, but all children and youth rely on co-regulation throughout childhood and adolescence to varying degrees. Co-regulation happens when we supportively come alongside our children when their emotions are escalating. We help them manage their feelings and behaviors through modeling, through helping them identify emotions, and by providing safe relational connection until they eventually develop the skills needed to regulate independently. As we consider options for how we provide this support, it's important to reflect on our own experiences and history. Improving outcomes for our children might require adjusting habits or challenging long-held beliefs about how we should or shouldn't respond to behaviors. Changing our go-to responses is difficult, especially in the heat of the moment. Like our kids, it's easy to default to old habits. But when we continue to respond in ways that cause behaviors to escalate, we know we have to seek a different solution. When you find yourself in one of these cycles of dysregulation, take time to consider, might my child have an unacknowledged or unmet need? Is their behavior communicating something to me that I'm not yet understanding? Are there skills my child might be lacking that I can help them learn? This process can be difficult to do alone, so gaining perspective and exploring options might involve connecting with others, such as parents who are experiencing similar behaviors with their own kids, or seeking the input of a pediatrician, a therapist, or other specialist who can help you to help your child. Next slide, Jamie. This quote sums up what we're talking about. What's missing that my child needs to succeed? As you work toward understanding what they might require to solve problems and effectively manage behaviors, here are some questions you can ask. What are common triggers or situations my child struggles with? Are there certain circumstances that I notice seem predictably stressful for them? Are there times of day when it seems they find it harder to stay regulated? When given a rule or expectation, is it one that's developmentally appropriate for my child? Do they have the skills and support they need to be able to understand and meet the expectation? Is my child able to independently regulate emotions, or do they need me to help them co-regulate? Have they developed the skills to control impulses? What accommodations, supports, or services can I provide that will help my child be successful? When I was thinking about that last point, I was trying to think of an example, and I happened to be working on my notes at night. So a personal example came to mind. At the end of a long or stressful day, for me, I often get the munchies before bedtime. So if there are cookies or snacks in close proximity, I'll eat them. And then I can't sleep because I'm full or sugared up. So I don't keep snacks in a readily accessible place. And I have a good book that I can look forward to reading instead when I crawl into bed. I identify what is a predictable struggle for me and modify my environment to set myself up for success. Most of the time. Sometimes I eat cookies and read the book. But you get the idea. Next slide, Jamie. So we want the lens through which we view our child's behaviors to focus on collaboratively building skills for managing emotions rather than specifically on compliance with rules and expectations. Here are some tips to consider as your child is learning new behavioral skills. Ensure that they feel heard, valued, and safe. A child who's dysregulated may be frightened by their own behaviors or big feelings. If we react rather than responding with care and intention, we may unintentionally escalate the situation. And isn't this true for us all? When we're upset and someone takes time to make sure we feel heard and validated, it usually restores a measure of calm. We all need this. Next, create strategies for building positive connections each day. Take 5 minutes to have a conversation about the highs and lows of the day. Make and share a meal together, play a game, take a walk, play with a pet, do an art project, read a story together, share jokes or memes, or whatever it is your family enjoys doing. Small moments of connection each day build the foundation for safe and predictable relationships and emotional regulation. Meeting needs. Learn to identify and meet the underlying needs that are triggering your child's behaviors. Make it your goal to listen and to understand the problem you're hoping to help them solve. Aligning to the child's goals. Increase intrinsic motivation and autonomy. Our kids' priorities may or may not align with our own. When our priorities are different than theirs, it becomes difficult for them to find a reason for change. Ask your child about their goals and work together to help them build skills that they need to achieve those goals. This morning, when I was getting ready for the presentation, a quote that I had heard at one point, and I apologize, I don't know where I heard it, but the quote says, "We as adults don't gain control by taking it. Compliance comes from giving it." So empowering our kids. And this is one example, aligning to the child's goals, where we can find ways to empower them. All right, focus on strengths. Focusing on strengths and areas of improvement, fostering a sense of autonomy, and also accomplishment and self-confidence. That can be really helpful and encouraging to a child. Allow your child the opportunity for a do-over. Don't we all wish for do-overs when we've hit a big emotional bump? Sometimes the opportunity to step back and start again is just what we need to be able to move forward positively. Identify and verbalize what you observe. Your face is red and you're breathing fast. I'm wondering if you might be upset right now. Let's think about what we can do that might help you feel better. Putting words to observations about emotions helps your child learn to recognize when they're becoming dysregulated and models for them how they might advocate for themselves as emotions begin to intensify. Try a time in instead of a time out. Disciplinary timeouts can sometimes escalate the situation and may leave your child feeling isolated instead of supported and empowered. The goal is to help the child become regulated. Think about what you need when you feel upset. What works for you to help restore calm? Ask your child what works for them. Even older children and youth may not yet have the words or awareness to answer this question, but you can help them explore ideas and plan for supportive connection going forward. Acknowledge when your child is doing well and ignore smaller behaviors when you can. We all know there's nothing more discouraging than having someone react to or pick at every little thing we do. Building safe connection involves holding positive expectations and choosing your battles. Finally, when you want to help school staff or other adults in your child's life understand how to support them, it can be helpful to create a summary or snapshot that highlights basic information about them. What are their current interests? What are their likes and dislikes? What motivates them? What discourages them? What are their gifts and strengths? A snapshot encourages other adults that interact with them to utilize your child's strengths and interests when addressing challenges and to inspire skill building. Next slide, Jamie. We want to touch on a couple of additional behavioral frameworks that can be used in a variety of environments to support your child's positive engagement. First, let's talk about positive behavior interventions and supports, or PBIS. PBIS is part of a state and nationwide initiative. Over 800 Minnesota schools and 25,000 schools nationwide have implemented PBIS. The basic PBIS approach is to use proactive, research-based strategies to teach clearly defined behavioral expectations and utilize ongoing behavior supports that can be modeled and implemented by school staff, parents, and community members. Research shows that when an environment is positive and predictable, students feel safer, achieve better academic performance, and make better behavior choices. Schools also show a gain in instructional time, a reduction in suspensions, and a decrease in both special education and discipline referrals. Ask your child's school if they are a PBIS school. Even if they aren't, you can still ask them to use PBIS strategies to support your child. We'll include links here with more information about PBIS. Another strategy currently used in schools and communities is called restorative practices. These practices are common around the world in communities that believe people are inherently good and relationally interconnected. They're a form of conflict resolution that focuses on accountability and healing harm that has been done, rather than solely on punitive measures. Practices such as restorative circles or peace paths can help students learn to perspective take and resolve conflict with the support of adults. Adapting the practices and principles of restorative justice to the school environment can lead to reduced suspensions, improved relationships, and increase in learning outcomes and positive connection between the student and the school. When it comes to behavior expectations and school discipline, students with disabilities are typically held to the same standards as their general education peers, unless the 504 plan or IEP detail modified expectations and consequences. If you feel your child needs an alternative approach to discipline, bring your concern to the IEP team. If you're seeing new or increasing behaviors with a child who receives special education services, review the current IEP to consider if it appropriately identifies and meets their current needs and learning priorities. If not, you may want to work with the team to determine if a new functional behavioral assessment or special education reevaluation might be needed to gather additional data to use to update the educational plan for effective support. If your child doesn't receive IEP services, but you think they need more support, you can request a special education evaluation. For more information on any of these topics, please feel free to reach out to PACER, and an advocate can assist you. All right, next slide. Okay, as we close, final thoughts on addressing behavioral concerns. Negative attention is still negative attention, and if misbehavior is the only way the child knows how to ask for your focus, the behaviors will likely continue until they develop the skills to ask for what they need in an effective manner. Instead of reacting to behaviors, shift your focus to discovering why the behavior is occurring and to explore ways to build skills for success. Children want to do well and to be successful. Much of the time, kids are already experiencing negative feelings about their own behaviors. So simply sharing with your child that you know they want to do well can sometimes ease the tension or even turn the behavior around in that moment. Knowing a rule and following it consistently are two distinct steps in the learning process that depend on a child's developmental capacities and opportunities for practice. Internalizing when and why a rule must be followed may take years of applied practice. Applying rules and norms. Our children are more likely to internalize rules and norms when they understand why they're important. Because I said so doesn't win over the buy-in of most kids. Consider how you can tie meaning to norms and expectations in a way that will connect with your child. Having the ability to self-regulate and to control impulses some of the time doesn't mean your child will be able to do it consistently across all situations. When they're successful, think about why they were able to exercise those self-regulation skills in that circumstance and how you can help them apply those same skills to more challenging situations now and in the future. Finally, remember to breathe and give grace to yourself and your child. Our children will learn from their mistakes, but they also learn important lessons from our mistakes. We're human. We're fallible. It's important for your child to learn from your modeling that they're no less worthy of love and acceptance when they fail. Be honest when you don't get things right, when you lose your patience, when you misunderstand them, when you aren't present in a way that they may have needed you to be present. When they hear you acknowledge a mistake of your own, it helps them to understand that progress isn't about getting it right every time. It's about learning and growing as we develop and practice new skills together. Next slide. All right, so that was our information that we have to share with you today. Karen mentioned that you will receive a survey. You should also already have received links to relevant resources that were sent via email. And now it's like we have about 25 minutes for questions. If there are topics that you'd like to discuss, you can feel free to put those in the chat.
So I see one question about says how can Pacer Center work with the Center for Independent Living organization in South Florida? We offer student transition services and peer supports. So Pacer Center is known as what's called a PTI. So it's a Parent Training and Information Center. Each state has their own. So if you want to, I guess I'm trying to think the best way. Um,
I can look up that information.
okay,
Put it
thanks.
in.
Yeah, maybe we
Yeah,
can put that
go
in the
ahead.
chat.
I'll
So
put it in there.
of course, Pacer Center information and resources are available to anyone, nationally through our website. But as far as us working directly with someone, we work only in the state of Minnesota. Um, people just said thank you. I know earlier there was a question about PBIS, what that abbreviation meant, and that is positive behavioral interventions and supports. Any other questions?
I just
Okay.
put the answer
Okay.
to that PTI question under the name of the person that asked. So it's parentcenter.com or .org. Now I have to look at it again. Oh, parentcenterhub.org. Parentcenterhub.org. And then you can look up Find Your Parent Center. And you can click on your state and it will show you the parent training and information centers similar to Pacer. There are some differences in what each center provides and how they provide it. But you can look there to determine what your options are in your state.
Um, let's see. I am a case manager. How can I support a student? And are there providers you have had success with to work alongside the school? Um, I know case managers often also get involved, attending IEP meetings or helping with accommodations. I don't know, Jeannie, do you know if there are people who work alongside the school? I know some schools have, school-based mental health supports within their buildings. Other things, Jeannie,
Well, it depends on the district. And it depends on the region of the state too. If you live in the metro area, there are lots of resources, obviously, and so schools have the opportunity to collaborate with outside supports and resources, and that's a little tougher in some of the outstate areas where there aren't as many resources. But that's, in my opinion, and Karen, you can weigh in on this and if you like, that's a question to explore with the IEP team. Sometimes IEP teams get stuck in sort of a framework of typical strategies that they use and they forget that they can get creative to explore other options. So if you feel like you're not getting the supports and services you need or the collaborative efforts that your child needs, bringing that question to that IEP team and asking, what haven't we tried yet? What are the other options? What can we do within the school itself? Are there outside resources that we can pull in or people who can attend an IEP meeting to talk with us about options or strategies? Get creative. It's part of the fun of advocacy, is the assumption that we're all here to support the student together and sometimes thinking outside the box to find those answers.
oftentimes also, encourage the parent. They have the right to invite anyone they want, who's possibly working with the child or anyone else to an IEP team meeting. Sometimes, if therapists that a child is working with outside of school is willing to join a meeting or provide suggested accommodations based on their work with the child, that can be helpful too, and they can collaborate with the IEP. Um, I think this is a great prevention strategy. What supports do you have for when an aggressive behavior is actively occurring? Examples include elopement, verbal aggression, or physical aggression. So, just as you mentioned that things are great preventative strategies, I think, of course, we have situations where, things don't work. But I think creating a crisis plan, creating a positive behavior support plan that includes things to do to prevent behaviors. So, oftentimes we see behavior support plans that are written in a way to react rather than to be proactive. So I think working with the team, if you're having a situation where something happens on a day to um, get the team together, process what happened, talk about what could have done differently. Really focusing on triggers is important. Um, Also, try not to be in a power struggle. Where could the school maybe have bent a little bit, maybe where the child could have bent a little bit, and try and find what just finding those preventative things. Um, I don't know, Jeannie, do you have anything else on that?
The only other thing I can think of is connecting back to the special education evaluation, making sure that the team has an understanding of why those behaviors are occurring. So, for example, if a student has sensory needs, they're sensory seeking or sensory avoiding, part of how we intervene when those behaviors begin to escalate is understanding what they're neuroceptive, what their body needs, what their mind needs, that they may not even be aware of. And if we have the data that helps us understand what those needs are, it gives us insights into the strategies that may work even in those heated moments to help restore calm.
Mhm. One other thing I'll say about that too is um, sometimes less is more. I think sometimes we get into situations where we have active aggression or eloping going on, and we're really trying to talk a lot at the student. And sometimes when a student is so dysregulated, they're not hearing you. So sometimes less verbalization is more. I think too when students, I know even with my own kids when they were having an issue at school or an episode, knowing that there's other students around can be really embarrassing for them and cause more escalation. So I think getting them to a private place or taking the rest of the class, to a different room and giving them their privacy when that's happening can also help.
Yeah, I can I add one more thing to
Yeah,
that?
of
I don't
course.
want to I don't want to miss opportunities to
No, no,
get
no, go
more
ahead.
questions, but I'm thinking back to a time when I was trying to explain co-regulation to a staff member related to my son, someone who didn't. It was a very confrontational, punitive focus within that school framework of philosophy. And I was explaining co-regulation, and one of the things that I said was, if you can imagine as an adult, when you're starting to feel dysregulated or really tense or upset or out of control, does it feel helpful to have someone at that point impose confrontational expectations or say, go to the garage until you can, you know, meet expectations or behave the way I want you to? Or is it more helpful to perhaps just have your spouse or family member sit down next to you on the couch and say, I can tell you're feeling really upset right now. I'm just going to sit here with you for now, and I'll be here for you. So, as Karen said, sometimes simplifying the response is better because when you're upset and you're starting to feel dysregulated, having more things thrown at you can sometimes create more tension and have the opposite effect of what we're looking for.
My teen daughter has anxiety about school and schoolwork when it gets to be too much, but she doesn't want to practice any coping mechanisms. What's the best approach to help with that? Those avoidance behaviors are really tough. Um, some things that we've seen that can be helpful is maybe not necessarily always practicing a coping behavior, but trying to figure out what how much she can tolerate, maybe adjusting the work, um, adjusting the demands, and meeting her where she's at. So rather than looking at it, we're going to practice how to cope with all of these demands, we might have to change the demands and just see how much can be tolerated. Do you have anything else on that one?
Um, Maybe the coping mechanisms need to change also. Now, sometimes we have good intentions about options for coping mechanisms. Sometimes those are coping mechanisms that our children have helped us develop. They've given their input on it, but they may not have enough insight or understanding about what works for them, or may not have experimented enough to be able to identify what will work for them. So sometimes exploring what other options for coping mechanisms might be helpful can empower our kids. So, what does a coping mechanism look like? Are there activities they really enjoy? Are there, kind of areas of distracting focus that can help them regulate? Even things that fall out of the traditional realm of quote unquote coping mechanisms. What works for your student and what works for your student 1 year or 1 month or one day won't necessarily work the same another week or another month or another year because their developmental capacities and their learning and their interests change. So it kind of requires evolving with learning new strategies.
Okay, it's hard to find the balance between holding our children accountable for their behavior and choices, but also knowing they need to have grace and they are learning social norms and expectations. Any thoughts? I know discipline is an individual choice, but in general, the balance and line as a parent is hard. It is really hard. Um, and I want to say, even though, we were teaching today about looking through this lens of behaviors being a symptom of an unmet need, and that it doesn't, it's not an attempt to excuse behaviors, it's more to explain behaviors. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. I know my daughter once had a meltdown at school and had damaged some things in the classroom. Um, so after we got through it, we talked about some reparative actions and for example, apologizing or helping replace some of the items that were damaged. So if there's natural consequences after things are de-escalated and processing, I think that can be appropriate. I think even if things weren't done with intent, and sometimes kids feel better when they know that they can do something reparative because they often have remorse also as well. So I don't know if that answers the question, but Jeannie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, I think that's a really great question, and it helps me see our presentation today through perhaps a different lens too, because I don't know that we clarify effectively in our presentation that the objective is to help kids learn to succeed in the world, to meet expectations. Our strategy isn't to adjust everything around them all the time, and that's the end of it. The strategy is how do we understand what's going on so that we can create accommodations, modifications, supports, and understanding that allows us to effectively equip them to meet expectations. And I hope that's a helpful clarification. Sometimes it's easy to forget, and sometimes I think it's easy for schools to forget that the IEP isn't just meant to get a student from 1 year to the next. The IEP, the purpose of the IEP, is ultimately to equip our students for the transition to adulthood. So we want to look through the lens of transition to adulthood. And if your child's in first or second grade, that may seem too far off to be relevant. But I think that frame of reference is important even early on. So How are we moving them toward the ability to become as independent and autonomous as possible when they graduate from high school, based on whatever their capacities might be? How do we take some steps back to learn how to most effectively equip them? So it isn't about excusing behavior, as Karen said. It's about equipping them to function well in the world, but sometimes that requires a shift of how we view and understand the origins of behavior and what their behaviors are telling us. Did that make sense? Was that- okay.
Um, I have two toddlers, 4 and 5. I know roughhousing is normal and healthy, but when should I draw a boundary? Um, I think definitely when safety is involved. If you're finding it's becoming unsafe, I think if you're finding as they're roughhousing, someone is becoming very angry, I think that would be a boundary. And also that they know when and where is an appropriate time to engage. Um, if they're able to understand, okay, when we're at home, when we're roughhousing in the living room or whatever, um, but maybe not, in the middle of the grocery store or whatever it may be, or in an unsafe place. Does that answer that, you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think depending too on their ability to share their thoughts on it, it might be willing, helpful to draw them into the conversation. At age 4 and 5, you can say, "What do you like? What's fun about this? What do you like about it? And what don't you like? When there's something that happens that makes you cry or unhappy about it, what don't you like?" And that accomplishes a couple of things. It allows them to relate rules or expectations to align with their own goals and objectives. And secondly, it helps them learn to self advocate. So they start identifying what works for them and what doesn't, and how to communicate that to somebody else.
Um, how do you talk to schools about using detention for behaviors? Um, I think in the child, I think also, I talk a lot with in schools about the IEP and remembering the I in the IEP. I think some schools have their, oh, this is our policy, this happens, we go to a detention. So, I often remind them, okay, we're talking about educational programming, but let's not forget the I, which is individualized. So I think it depends on the student. Jeannie, do you have thoughts?
No, I would agree with Karen. I think when a district is using something like detention and it becomes a pattern, that tends to be a signal that something isn't working. If they're on an IEP plan, taking a look at that educational support program with the IEP team becomes important. So, why do they keep ending up in detention? If we can understand the reason for that, we may be able to equip them so they can meet expectations and not land in detention.
Right. Um, let's see, next one. My son is 8 years old, starting to use AAC, and we are not able to clearly identify the reasons most of the time for his impulsive behaviors. What is AAC? Do you know, Jeannie?
It's an alternative communication
Oh,
device.
oh,
Yeah.
oh, okay. Thoughts on this one, Jeannie? You-
Um, That might be, we have someone who specializes in that area at Pacer, and it may be helpful to call Pacer and ask specifically for someone who can address
Mhm.
that AAC specific concern. Otherwise, I think the concern still falls into the regular process of advocacy with the IEP team. So that becomes a question for the team and the specialists that are on the team that are working with your child. So pose the question. We're not able to clearly identify the reasons. How do we do that? If we don't know, if no member of the IEP team knows, How do we find someone who can help us understand that? What are the resources we need to look into so that we do understand, so that we can meet those needs?
And sometimes if you can't um, easily identify the internal reasons or what the child may be going through at that time, you may be able to identify external patterns. For example, is it always during math time? Is it always during lunchtime? Is it always during transition time? So you might be able to identify some of those triggers in that way, if to see when the behavior is happening and see if there's any patterns.
Yeah, and we talked earlier, that's a really great point, Karen. We talked earlier about what's called a functional behavioral assessment. And an FBA is the acronym because everything in special education has an acronym. Um, Makes it challenging sometimes. But an FBA looks into some of those questions. So it includes observations and input from staff and from parents related to behaviors so that that data is collected, just like what Karen described. And when that data is collected and we start looking at if there are patterns, does it happen during a certain time of day? Does it happen during a certain class or a certain kind of interaction or unstructured activities or hallway transitions or whatever it might be? That allows the IEP team to gain the data it needs to create a positive behavior support plan to help support that student.
Um, if there's any resources on that. I think that's the same person that asked the question about the 4 and 5-year-old rough housing. Um, as far as resources, I don't know. The question's not super specific, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think we might need
uh,
more
Need more
information, but Sarah,
information.
if you want to contact Pacer and talk with an advocate, that's something that we would be happy to explore with you. And I
Are
think,
there oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say that, I think we're almost out of time here, but that last question here from Samson, do you know of any websites or assistive devices that can help with regulation and social skills? Pacer has a department called the Simon Technology Center, and that's exactly what they do. They are amazing. It's a great experience. It's a free service. I brought my son in for learning some of those social, emotional regulation, executive functioning skills, but any disability area. The Simon Technology consultants will do an interview with you to understand your child's needs. They may review the IEP or the evaluation to make sure they understand what the needs are. They'll talk to you about what your child likes or doesn't like, and then they do the research and put together a collection of all different kinds of assistive technology. So that might include apps, it might include games, it might include neural feedback, it might include more concrete tools that a student can use. And you can either do an online discussion with them or you can come in to Pacer and they will lay out all these options for you and your student to explore at Pacer. So, for example, we went in and my son took a look at and tried out different apps alongside the consultant, different items for assistive technology, and was able to say, I don't think I would use that, or yeah, I think this might really work. They have a lending library, so you can borrow things before purchasing something to see if it will work for you. And assistive technology can be incorporated into the IEP. So whether your student is just trying something out or you've discovered that something really works for that student, you can ask the IEP team to include it in the IEP, and to ensure that someone is able to come alongside them to help them learn how to use that assistive technology in the school environment. And there is a section in the IEP related to assistive technology. So that's something that the IEP team can address. Karen, do you want to add anything to that?
Oh, I think that's great. Yeah, STC is
Okay.
great. Let's see. Can behavior services through the school only be supported if the child has behavioral issues at school? My son has behavioral issues at home and not at school, so he currently is not receiving behavioral services. Um, schools don't provide direct services in that way, at home. But what you could do is ask what's working at school. Oftentimes it goes the other way. The schools might ask parents what works for you at home. So you could, talk about accommodations or ideas that way. But I would encourage you to reach out to some outside therapy. Speak to the school social worker. They may have resources. You can call someone at Pacer as well. Um, but working on those, therapeutic helps or interventions at home usually is through either, a case manager or a therapist to get help that way. Um, can I know more about PBIS? Can a parent get trained? There's lots of information on our website about PBIS. Do we have a specific training on that, Jeannie? I don't know.
I don't think so.
Yeah, usually I think, it was more training schools, how to implement PBIS. I know we did that years back.
There's
But
a
look at the
lot of
website.
information online.
Yeah,
It's a
a lot.
readily accessible topic, and it's one of those topics where people have done a really great job with, graphics and everything, so it makes it really accessible. So if you do a little searching around, and there's information about applying those same strategies at home.
Let's see. Can I use time out and time in tandem? Um, I think, every child is different. I don't want anybody to, I guess, walk away from this presentation feeling like what you're doing is wrong or, like there's one right way or one wrong way. Um, these are all ideas. I think each situation is different. So Ginny, do you have any more on that or okay.
I think we
Um,
missed one from Ginny.
oh, where's
Can
that?
behavior services through the school only be supported if the
Oh,
child
yeah,
has
we did that
behavioral
one.
issues at school? Oh, we did do that one?
Yep, yep, we
Oh,
did
did
do
I? Where was I?
that. Oh, here's one, Miss. How do we apply these techniques when the other parent will not buy into them? I have 70% custody, but my child's father is undermining my consistency and denies her diagnoses. Um, it sounds like she's with you most of the time. I think do what you can do. And I think for some of those other struggles, again, working with outside therapy for ideas about that could be helpful. Anything on that, Jeannie?
Um, I'm not sure, Melinda, if the question relates to home or school.
Mhm.
So I think Karen provided a really great answer. I think if it relates to parent buy-in related to school supports and services, it's helpful to tie in your advocacy points to the special education evaluation because that's solid data that the school uses to develop the IEP. So whether or not the other parent agrees, the district uses that special education evaluation data to create the child's individual education program. So you can pull out data to advocate regardless of the other parent's opinion. Their opinion still matters. If they have educational rights, they still have the right to those discussions and decision-making processes. But that evaluation data I find is really helpful to use something concrete. What are your thoughts on that, Karen?
No, I agree. Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Do you want to look at the one from Kylie? Let's see. My 12-year-old daughter deals with a lot of school refusal. We are working through the complex whys behind this, but oftentimes she asks for a reward to go to school, picking up Culver's, free ice cream after school, going to the store, etc. This isn't sustainable for me or seem fair to her four other siblings who attend school without an issue. Do you have any suggestions about the rewards? I'm not sure how she got that idea. Perhaps just something to look forward to when school feels hard.
Do you want me to?
Sure, you
Jump
can
in
chime
now.
in this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
First, I will throw in a pitch for the fact that we will be doing a school refusal
Mhm.
presentation specifically, I think coming up in January. I
I
can't
think
remember
so.
when it is exactly, but keep an eye out for that. There are some really great school refusal resources. I think there's a school avoidance alliance online that has some great articles for parents. What stands out to me, Kylie, about your question is that your daughter seems to be looking for a way to deal with her school refusal, which I find is interesting. So she recognizes there's an issue and she's trying to find incentive. For her, Culver's ice cream is incentive. So the question might be, first of all, which is what we typically do with school refusal, take a look at that deeper level. Why is she struggling to want to go to school? Is that because some of her disability needs aren't understood or being met? Does it relate to socializing and friends? At 12 years old, that social component is really complex. And at age 12, both the academic and the social demands and complexity are increasing dramatically at school. So some anxiety might be existing there. There are a number of reasons why that avoidance might be there. So exploring with her, maybe going out for ice cream at Culver's and talking with her, because we know that that produces a sense of calm or control for her. Exploring some of those things, when you're at school and things feel good and you want to be there, what does that look like? What's happening? Who are you engaging with? What's working? What are the parts of school that make that you, where you don't want to go or you don't feel good about going? What's happening in those environments? So trying to get to the bottom of the reason for the avoidance so that you can address the cause and hopefully resolve the need of your daughter to avoid school itself. And it isn't always a bad thing to have a reward system, but a reward system here, I think, is her attempt at resilient coping and communicating to you and to the school that something's just not working. We want to understand what that is.
Yeah, I think too, maybe putting some parameters around the rewards. Let's make a list of things that you really enjoy that don't cost money, and then you can pick one of those. Or let's get a sticker, or a star every day you do go to school. And once you get, I don't know, 10 stars, then we go to Culver's. So it's not a daily occurrence. So maybe putting some parameters that way could be helpful.
I had my son had in his IEP, there was a service provider that he was supposed to meet with once a week. And it was for a need that he recognized that he had, and he wanted to make improvements in that area. It was identified in his evaluation as a disability need, but he was not going to class. He couldn't get to class. And the school decided that the best approach was to give him a donut every time he went to class. And and I was proud of him because at one IEP meeting, he said of his own accord, how does giving me a donut help me override my anxiety and engage with this part of my education? I can't remember how he put it. It wasn't quite like that. but um, but I was just kind of astounded at his own insight about that. And they didn't have an answer to that. And I said, well, can we look into that? And I spent a little bit of time talking to him about why that is. Do you see the need? Yeah, I do. I need to work on these things. And I said, what is it that isn't working? When you're there, what are you doing? And he said, well, we're doing worksheets. And the worksheets are, he was 17 or 18. The worksheets were for little kids and they didn't really apply to real life circumstances for him. And I said, well, I can understand that. Why, he said, what would look different for you? What would be good? What would work for you? And he said, well, if we could do something other than worksheets, because he doesn't do super well with worksheets, if we could do role playing, if we could make the topics relevant to something related to my age or my goals or something. And I thought, well, those are great insights. So we were able to bring those to the IEP team and say, here's what the obstacles are. So, instead of using a donut as an incentive, can we change, accommodate, adjust how the supports and services are provided so that we get buy-in from him, so that it becomes meaningful to him? And that was the word he used. I need it to be meaningful to me. And right now, what I'm getting isn't.
So I see there's still a lot of questions in the Q&A box. Jamie, I'm wondering if there's a way for us to like copy those and have them and then maybe be able to get back to people.
Yes, we can
Um,
capture a report on the all the questions and who
okay,
asked. So yes,
okay.
we will do that.
I think we
Well, maybe
have, yeah, Jeannie, go ahead.
I was going to say, we also always want to encourage parents to call in to Pacer.
Mhm.
If you're a Minnesota parent, call in and request to speak with an advocate. And most of these questions, I think, can be answered by an advocate when you connect with one of us. Maybe another option would be for Jamie to capture the questions, and we can do an email response, kind of group topics together, and provide some helpful responses
Yeah, that would be
via
great.
email. Does
Sorry.
that sound okay?
Yeah, I think that'd be great because I don't want to rush through the questions and I also don't want to keep people, longer because we're already like 15 minutes past.
Yeah, they're
So
great questions. You guys are
yeah, they're wonderful. It's a
wonderful
great
questions.
discussion. So okay, yeah. So Jamie, if you could capture all the questions for us, and then Jeannie and I will go through those and respond to people, that'd be great. All right. Thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you for the conversation and the engagement and the wonderful questions. And Jeannie, anything else?
Yeah, it was great to spend the hour with you. Thanks for joining us.
All right.
All right, with
Thanks.
that, okay, with that, I will end today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.